Excuse me, everyone. Please take your seats. We're about to start. Your Cruz right up to the left.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi. Come up here, right in front here. We're right to start back. Right here. Thank you. Appreciate it. Where's Joe? Joe. We're literally about to start right now. You ready, Maddie? Yep. I'll call you up in 2 seconds. Excuse me, everyone. Before we start the program, we want to call up to the stage if everyone would take a seat. We're going to call up to the stage Mary Milben, who's an award-winning singer who's joined us today. She's going to be performing right before President Trump. She performs in many places where President Trump is and at many different events. Mary Milben.
Well, good morning to you all. I have been locked away. Hi, Steve. It's so good to see you. I've been locked away in my hotel room since the start of this convention, but I said it was hard to say no to Steve and to Larry, and I know some good friends in the room. Tulsi, where's Tulsi's in the room, and my fellow Oklahoman, Mr. Hammond, and Bernadette, and all these fun friends. And so I said, well, let me get out and put on a red dress and come celebrate America this morning. It's good to be with you all this morning. Thank you, Steve and Larry and Dr. Arthur and all those for the kind invitation to be here. What a wonderful week so far we have had, yes, at the convention, and celebration certainly of my friend, the 47th President of the United States, President Donald Trump, and certainly the First Lady Melania Trump, and in celebration of our great country. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Why don't you stand with me as we open this breakfast this morning, celebration of America. Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight for the ramparts we watched were America. Have a wonderful breakfast this morning.
We're going to hear from Green Beret, former Special Forces, Scotty Neal, who will be performing tonight at the convention. He's the president of Horse Soldier Bourbon. Scotty Neal.
I hate to do this again and ask everybody to stand as we honor this country, the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could face the flag and place your hand over your heart. Follow along with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, back to breakfast. Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Arthur, get up here. We're going to have, we're going to try to make this as educational and fun as possible. We're going to have a lot of discussion about the economy. We're going to have a lot of discussion about politics, and appreciate everyone being here, appreciate our C-SPAN audience, and appreciate C-SPAN for covering us. And so I thought we would start, if we may, with a video that Lee Rizzuto, Lee, where are you? Where's Lee? Lee and I put together, and I thought you might get a kind of kick out of this, and I think it's extremely timely. So can we roll the tape, please?
They said his election in 2016 was illegitimate. They concocted the Russia collusion hoax. They said his economic plan would cause a Great Depression. They went after his family. They want to put him in jail for 400 years. They tried to impeach him 5 times. They rigged a trial in New York. He even survived an assassination attempt. Donald J. Trump is indestructible.
Partner at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. For those of you who are not too familiar with our group, we started about 8 years ago, and it was a combination of the great Larry Kudlow and Arthur Laffer and Steve Forbes and myself. And the goal of our committee is really to try to get the best economic ideas into the plans of all of the politicians in the states, in Washington, and around the world. And both Larry and I, and Arthur as well, signed up with Trump 8 years ago, and that was a great decision, and he was a great president. By the way, Arthur, you and I share something in common that I'm extremely proud of, but you probably more so since you were so influential. Both Arthur Laffer and I, and I think there are some other people in the room who share this honor, worked for the 2 greatest presidents of the last 50 years, Ronald Reagan and Donald J. Trump. So, and you all know that Arthur Laffer, by the way, was the architect of Calvin Coolidge's famous tax cut in the 1920s. But, and the Kennedy tax cuts, but he was the architect of the Reagan tax cuts. So I wanted to start with a question for you, Arthur. And that is, and by the way, Harold Hamm from Continental, who is the godfather of the shale revolution, is here too. So Harold, thanks so much for joining us. But I wanted to start with you on Reagan and Trump, and kind of what you see as the similar. You work very closely with both of them. How do you compare them? Do you see similarities, differences? How do you assess that?
Fix it. I'm just going to talk about economics if I can. I mean, there are lots of other issues in this world that are important.
You needed to turn it on. That was the problem.
I didn't know how to. You know, you got a button there to push or something like that. Gosh sakes. You know, there are lots of other issues that are really important to a lot of people, but I talk about economics. That's where I stick it, and I stay on my track. And you know, the two presidents were very, very similar. You know, we had the Reagan the tax bill, which we cut tax rates by about 25% across the board. Trump had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. If you look at all the rest of it, the only big difference between the two, and medical transparency, is I don't know if you remember, Ronald Reagan had NAFTA, but we never got it passed. It had waited till Clinton, we got it. But if you look at the economics, the whole situation viewed to be Trump and Reagan were very, very similar. I think Reagan would have loved Donald Trump personally. And if you want to know personalities and stuff, they are very different personalities. But the whole Reagan kitchen cabinet were Donald Trump's. Every one of them. My godfather was a man named Justin Dart Kraft. I don't know if any of you know that. Bill Wilson, Holmes Tuttle, Jack Rather, Bill French Smith. That whole group of the kitchen cabinet were all Donald Trump's. Reagan was a very different delivery mechanism, but the two were very similar in there. And you know, I look at it. Let me just be 1 second. But I look at it in the sort of the light of the 5 pillars of prosperity: taxes, government spending, sound money, minimal regulations, and free trade. Those are the 5 pillars. And if you look at it, all 5 of those pillars, Trump moved us closer to the ideal, and Reagan moved us closer to the ideal on all of those. The situations were different. So Reagan was able to get the highest tax rate. Now just think of this for a second. In his whole term, 2 terms, he got the highest marginal income tax rate down from 70% to 28%. Is that a good enough cut for you? It's okay, you know, you're not really, we skimped out a little bit, we wussed, but we only got it down to 28. We tried to get it down to 7, but just joking. We got the corporate tax rate down from 46 to 34%. You know, we got the capital gains tax way down. It was almost at 50%. We brought that down as well. I mean, it's an amazing thing that happened there. Trump, the same way, only the corporate tax was the key under Trump. But a very similar agenda and all the way across the board, and the 2 presidents are very similar. I do believe that, honestly, that I think as far as the first term goes, Trump is the single best president in the United States history. Better than Reagan, best president in U.S. history in economics. And, you know, amazing. If you look at medical transparency, that is a big deal, probably more than taxes. Transparency. If you look at right to try, if you look at what he's done in all these other issues there, I mean, drill, baby, drill, I took to you, Harold. But I mean, what he has done on that, I think puts him well ahead of Reagan in his first term. Now, Reagan had the 86 Tax Act, which by the time Trump gets to a second term, which will be very soon, I think Trump can outdo Reagan even on the second term. But Reagan was wonderful, but I think Trump can get a better job done on economics, and we need it badly.
So we are joined by the great Doug Burgum, the governor Governor, thanks so much for joining. You ran a great campaign for president and infused the campaign with amazing ideas on energy, on economic development. The fact that you're a businessman is something that is greatly lacking in this administration. Tell us your assessment of things and what I'm sure you'll be working over the next 4 months to get Donald Trump elected, but how do you see the world right now? Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and good morning, everybody. I want to just start with gratitude, Committee to Unleash Prosperity, the amazing work that all of you are doing, and then everybody here that's today. I mean, the work that happens because of your support, your participation. All of you are here because you care about our country. You're here because you care about your communities. You care about your kids and your grandkids, and you know that their future depends on how we do as a country. Our strength has always been rooted in our economic strength, and so the ideas that are being discussed and the work that's being done by this committee is so important. So I just want to say thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for all of you being in the arena, and what an amazing panel. I'm honored to be included in with these icons of American history that are up here.
You ever met this guy?
I have, and I met him, studied both of you, so that's a great to be here. But we have an incredible opportunity. We're at a cusp right now of unleashing a new wave of economic activity driven by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has got an opportunity to transform every job, every industry, and every company. And it's going to do that, and it's going to hit us sooner and faster. The next wave that's coming this year is going to be an order of magnitude better and stronger than what's here right now. But we have a lead. I mean, we're in an AI arms race with China. The existential threat to our country is not, it's not a degree temperature rise by 2100. The existential threat is what we have right now with adversaries, and especially China. We have a bunch of ways that we can win the Cold War with China, but we're not doing it right now. They have, because of people like Harold, we've got energy security in our country. China imports 11 million barrels of oil a day. We've got the best farmers and ranchers in the world. We produce so much food. We've got food security, which we never, ever talk about. We just take it for granted because that's something we have. China has to import food to feed those people every day. But the one thing that they're doing that we're not, under Joe Biden with his energy policies, he's shutting down baseload energy in our country right now. If the rules and regulations that they've tried to do to shut down our base load and think that we can just live on intermittent, that would be solar and wind, that only works when the sun shines and the wind blows. We need base load to be able to have manufacturing. We need base load electricity that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter what. And of course, nuclear is part of that solution in the future, but it's not here yet. But what we have right now is China is building, they've got commissioned they're the world's largest polluter right now, world's largest in CO2 emissions. They are opening more coal plants. They have more coal plants under construction right now than everything we have in the United States. You could shut down every plant we have in the U.S., totally destabilize our grid, which is what the Biden energy policy is trying to do, and China will build more than that at the same time. So we're not doing anything relative to saving the environment with this policy of economic martyrdom around a falsehood around some climate goals. And then we have we have the thing which is AI. AI takes electricity. The whole time I was in technology, we consumed about 1% of the nation's electricity for 30 years. Even though everybody got a cell phone, everybody had a personal computer, the efficiency was there, and we were about 1%. That could grow to 6 or 10% of the total demand for electricity in this country could go to data centers to drive AI. And AI, like I said, we're in an arms race. Here we're using it to try to make a job more efficient. China's using it to impact their military. And so the world order is going to be determined by who leads in AI. That can't happen unless we have energy here. And then we also, again, this thing which Harold is in our state. This guy's an incredible hero. And what Harold did with horizontal drilling. Think of that as innovation. They don't think of oil guys as tech guys. What Harold did was a miracle. The Bakken, which is one of the largest oil fields in the world, is in many cases a 30-foot strip of hard rock shale, 10,000 feet below the ground, and that guy figured out how to go down 2 miles, turn a corner, drill sideways for 2 miles, and turn hard rock into oil. And without that, we wouldn't have the Marcellus, we wouldn't have the Permian, we wouldn't have the Bakken, and and you want to talk about a tax cut. What Harold did, that's like $1 trillion, literally $1 trillion of saving to all of you and everybody that works for you, because every consumer in America paid less for their food, their clothes, their gas in their car, they heat their home because of what Harold Hamm did in American innovation. And that innovation can accelerate if we have AI. If we lose the AI arms race, it's over with China.
So, Bip, I know you've got a crazy day today, and you're one of the top surrogates for the president. How do you see things going in the election? What do you think is the path to victory? What do you think Donald Trump has to do to win?
Well, I think we're in an incredible position versus where we were 3 weeks ago, and there's just been win after win after win, and in the middle of that, something that was horrifyingly millimeter away from chaos and mourning. But when Donald Trump won that debate, that wasn't like winning a debate. That was a knockout. I mean, that was like a Rocky-style knockout. And he didn't just knock out a candidate that got exposed that has been a giant conspiracy hiding President Biden's condition. that everybody's been complicit on it, and including Vice President Harris, everybody around the White House, the media. I mean, that was, I think, if all of you weren't surprised, if all you watched was MSNBC and then you saw that, you're like shocked because you've been told that, hey, this guy's a rocket science behind closed doors, and then you're seeing what you can't unsee what you saw with your eyes that night, no matter how much positioning and spinning they do. But so the whole ruling regime that was put together in 2020, Elizabeth Warren nominating everybody that, for all of the stuff that's driving every company crazy across, her appointees in FTC, SEC, and all these other places that are affecting mergers and regulations, all the climate warriors that are bearing a state like North Dakota with 30 plus rules and regulations, and just one of those is the smallest one is 800 pages. They typically are 1,400 pages. We've run out of lawyers in North Dakota trying to fight the federal government on regulation. And Arthur talked about the president being the greatest president. The other thing that he did was he got rid of a lot of regulation during the time that he was in office, which is a relief. So there's that win that night threw their party into complete disarray, so that would be great. Then the next morning, Supreme Court cases started coming in, the Chevron deference, which is going to help the economy. That's a big win, yes. And then you have these other court cases that have been win for the president. And then, of course, this a millimeter away from a complete change in history on Saturday night. And then that, I think, created an image which is real. President Trump's first response when he got up was the courage, the resilience, the spirit, the fight, and that picture, which will now be in children's school books 100 years from now, of him with his fist up, with the flag flying over his head. That contrast versus Joe Biden. I mean, again, if you're an independent or you're a Democrat, you look at that and you say, "Wow, we have two different things going on." And in a world where we're in a proxy war with Iran, we're in a proxy war with Russia, we're in a cold war with China. President Trump is actually a deterrent himself. I mean, people look at President Trump and they if we do something, he'll do something back. I mean, he's a deterrent. He's like a national security. Joe Biden, they look at him and go, "Hey, we can do whatever we want, and he's not going to do anything." I mean, we're empowering a terrorist group, we're empowering countries, we empower Putin, and then Joe Biden's energy policies are funding Iran and Russia. Those countries are benefiting from his effort to shut down U.S. energy. That's helping those countries. Iran's production is up under Joe Biden. North Dakota's production is down under Joe Biden. That's all you need to know.
So, Governor, we need you in the Trump cabinet, don't you think? We need this guy in the Trump cabinet. Thank you so much for being here, everything you've done, and I know you'll be, Treasury Secretary or Energy Secretary or Commerce Secretary, but you've been amazing. We met you.
Cabinet bingo.
We met the governor, 9 months ago in New York, and you just, a lot of people at that time, they didn't know who the governor of North Dakota was, but now everybody in America knows who the governor of North Dakota is. So,
thank you, Steve. Thank you.
All right. I've neglected to say, first of all, at the outset, that we have so many of our supporters, our financial supporters in this room, and I just want to thank you all for making what we do possible, including you, Harold. You've been with us from the start. So thank you all for helping make what Larry Kudlow and Art Laffer and I and Steve Forbes do. We are so appreciative of your support. Arthur and I have a book that will be coming out hopefully in mid-September that we've talked quite a bit with President Trump about. We've met with him several times about the book, and the original title of the book, kind of the working title, was Trumponomics 2.0, because I think you all know that we wrote Trumponomics, 7 or 8 years ago. And Trump was very enthusiastic about this, but he didn't like the title at all. He didn't like the title. So, not Trumponomics 2.0. He said, "Here is the title for your book," and we've adopted it. The Trump Economic Miracle. That is the title of the book. So I'd like to go over some of the charts in the book, because it's a really kind of a compare and contrast of what, this is really an easy election, right? We have two people who've been president now for virtually 4 years. They've had diametrically opposite economic programs, and now we can put their records side by side. And so I wanted to show you some of the key charts from the book. And Arthur, I'd love you to chime in if you have thoughts about some of these. So let's start with this. I think this is the game, set, match chart that, and by the way, Trump loves these charts. He loves the pictures too. So anyway, this is really, I think, the key point, and it's something that I think that Biden will have a hard time explaining, which is that if you look, and this even includes the COVID year, but the average income for a worker went up about $4,000 when Trump was president. And by the way, this is after inflation. So post-inflation, a $4,000 gain. It was up to about almost $6,000 before COVID, and then COVID took a lot of steam out of the economy. But you can see that's a pretty darn good record. I don't think any president, except maybe Reagan, had more income gains in real terms than Trump did. And the Biden record is pretty lousy. That is to say that the average worker has lost about $2,000 of income per year while Biden has been president. And that means that, to put this very simply, the average worker today is poorer than they were when Biden came into office. And then the White House says, well, gee, why is everybody so angry? Well, because they're poor. They can't afford things. And so this is kind of a key argument. And you remember when Ronald Reagan said, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? I think that's exactly the argument that Trump should make. Do you have any thoughts about this one? Or should you go ahead?
Just very simply, if it hadn't been for COVID-19, he would be president instead of Biden.
For sure.
I mean, everyone conceded that issue. He was a shoo-in, and then COVID-19 came and hit, and who could have guessed that would happen? But clearly a far better president than Biden ever, not even close. And in my view, he's a better president than Reagan was in the first term. And now his second term, he has a challenge because Reagan was really good in his second term, but I think Trump can outdo that.
So one thing, by the way, just as an aside, I mean, can we all agree in this room that never, 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 never again should we ever allow the government to shut down our economy, right? Never again. Never shut down our businesses, our churches, our schools. I believe this was the single greatest tragic abuse of power perhaps in American history. By the way, our committee came out with a study of the top academics, the top health officials, the top economists, and we found that the COVID lockdowns killed 10 times more people than they saved. That is, about 600,000 people died from lockdowns and about 60,000 lives were saved. So we should never do that again. Okay, the next chart is, this is an important one. This is about where are the jobs. Now, Biden has a good record on jobs, no question about it. We've had strong employment under Joe Biden. The problem is all the jobs are in all the wrong places. So the number one employer for the country over the last several years has been government and healthcare. Government healthcare. Healthcare is 50% funded by government. And by the way, Arthur has a great project you're doing on healthcare transparency, which I'd love for you to talk a little bit about. But look, why are we hiring all these new government workers? And, if you're the CEO of a company and you're losing $2 trillion, Harold, do you go on a hiring spree? I mean,
no.
This makes no sense, right? And so the government, what's happening is just government spending and hiring is what's at least temporarily propping up the economy. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have not caught up yet to the participation rate that we had before COVID-19 hit. We aren't close to that. If you look at the trend line there, we're below it. So I really don't think that Biden did that great a job. Now, there was a recovery from the very bottom of COVID-19. It bounced up. The first bit was under Trump, but then Biden has not even caught up to the trend line that was there before. So I would really argue that he's not done a great job. He's done a huge amount of welfare payments to people. Yep. And if someone gives you $1 million free and clear, are you going to go back and work overtime at your job for $5 an hour? No, I don't think so. They're going to all quit. So we have all these people who've left the labor force because of transfer payments. And at some stage, I'd like to go through the transfer theorem with someone just to explain why it works the way it does.
All right, let's go to the next one. Productivity. Labor productivity, the key to higher wages is obviously a more productive workforce. We saw huge gains in productivity under Trump, very small, tiny gains in productivity under Biden. That's why wages have not kept up with inflation. This is kind of an interesting one. Just how do Americans feel about the condition of the economy? This is consumer confidence numbers. You can see the consumer confidence numbers just plunged when Biden came into office, and they remain very low ever since. This is the other killer for Biden. This is inflation. I mean, we were talking about this last night. I'd like your reaction to this, Arthur, that Many of you may have seen that in Jerry Baker's newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, they surveyed 75 top academic business economists, and these economists said that they thought that Biden would be better than Trump on inflation. They also said Biden would be better than Trump on lowering the debt, and they also said that Biden would be better than Trump on interest rates. And this is an absurdity, right? Because if you look, it's not as if Trump has not ever been president before. He has been, so we don't have to speculate about what he would do. He already did it. And you can see from this chart, the average inflation rate when Trump was in office was 2%. That's a pretty good record, wouldn't you say? 2%. The average, now inflation is coming down, but the average inflation rate since Biden came into office is over 6%. So how could any rational person say that Biden would be better on inflation than Trump? I mean, to me,
you're going to ask me.
Yeah,
You're
I mean,
gonna,
how does
being
that
a
make any
PhD
sense?
professor myself,
Yes.
you're going to ask me how dumb my profession is. Well, there's an old story that it takes a PhD in economics not to be able to understand the obvious.
Right. Right. That's so true.
And
It's a
you know,
perfect example.
It's a very, simple. People respond to incentives. If you make something more attractive, they'll do more of it. If you make something less attractive, they'll do less of it. You know, taxes make things less attractive. Government spending makes things more attractive. If you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work. Do I need to say the next sentence to you guys? Hello? I mean, this is just the worst thing I've ever seen, and I don't know why my colleagues at the university would say what they do say, but I do know them very well, and they've always said what's wrong.
Yeah. All right. This is the
Can I just do one other one?
Yes,
There's just,
please.
you know, why UCLA professors have round shoulders and flat foreheads? You ask them a question, they go, you tell them the answer, and they go,
Now. My old boss Ed Crane used to say, if you laid down all of the economists from end to end, that it would be a good thing. It's supposed to be that they couldn't reach a conclusion. All right, so this is a point that my friend Jason Trenard is going to talk about a little bit later, but when you look at the essentials that people have to buy, we're not talking about, you know, computers and telecommunication costs and things like that. We're talking about the things people have to buy: their groceries, their gas, they have to pay their insurance, they have to pay their rent. Those things are up very, very substantially higher. That the inflation rate of those things is closer to about 25%, which adds to people's financial stress. This is one perfect for you, Arthur. Maybe you can explain this one. But when we first met with Trump, back in 2015 or 2016 early, one of the first things we told him about was the corporate tax, and that our corporate tax was the highest rate in the world. And Trump got that instantly and said, we have to cut the rate. This is what Biden wants to do. He wants to raise the American tax rate higher than the rate in Europe, higher than the rate in China, higher than the rate in Russia. So can you explain that one?
yeah, it's very simple. And I got to use two hands, so forgive me. If you have two locations, A and B, and you raise taxes in B and you lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from. Am I going way over your heads on this one, Peter?
Well, there are some politicians in the room.
I mean, if you raise U.S. taxes relative to the rest of the world, guess who's going to lose all the business? The biggest thing about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was the amount of profits that we brought back to the U.S. in December of 2017. They came flowing back. That's why we had a huge increase in corporate, why we had a huge increase in tax revenues in the 2 years following the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act than we had in the prior 2 years. The increase was not only there, but the increase in the 2 years following was greater than the increase in the prior 2 years. This was a revenue boon. They said that it would be a huge deficit of $1.5 trillion over 10 years. We paid for that tax cut, more than paid for it, in less than 2 years.
Woo! That's called the Laffer curve, folks. So what's the effect? You know, let's because this is an important point you're making. What's the effect of this then, if Biden were to come in and raise our corporate rate to that high?
I think you could see more Biden. Can I do one on this?
Yeah.
Just because it's on Doug's area, and I want to do it on a couple of other people's area, and I want to talk about it in Reagan terms as well. It has to do with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, free trade, all of this stuff. The one thing that was so neat about Ronald Reagan, and similarly so neat about Donald Trump, is Donald Trump believed in peace through strength, as did Reagan. And when you say peace through strength, I want to stress what this means. The quote I'm going to do is a John F. Kennedy quote that is so great, that the best form of defense spending is always wasted. Whenever you find yourself in a situation where you are required to use your military hardware and prowess, that is a clear sign you did not spend enough. The reason you want a strong economy and large defense spending is so that we never have to use those weapons, because they won't do it. During the 8 years of Reagan, there were no major riots in the United States. During the 8 years of Reagan, there were no major wars in the United States. During the 4 years of Donald Trump, there were no major wars. The moment Donald Trump's most wonderful trait is he'll make a strong economy, and he'll sit down with these people. He'll sit down with Xi. He'll sit down with Kim Jong-un, as he did in Singapore. He'll sit down with people, and we'll solve these problems without killing thousands and thousands and thousands of people just to show off.
Well, you know what's the
Bad economics and weak leadership leads to war. Bob Mundell, in his Nobel laureate speech, said it was the Smoot-Hawley tariff that caused the Great Depression. And it was the Great Depression that caused World War II. This is, with Donald Trump, our greatest safety to avoid the Third World War is the strong economy and strong defense, because then Putin and Xi and these other people won't do it. But he will be able to stop the wars before they start, not win the wars once they're started. Winning a war is not what you want. What you want to do is never have the war start. And Donald Trump can assure us that that won't happen.
Well put. So, Arthur and I had the privilege about 3 or 4 weeks ago of going to the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. How many of you in the room have been to the Reagan Library? If you have not gone to the Reagan Library, you have got to go. I mean, I've been there, you've been there many times, I've been there 3 or 4 times. Every time I go, I just find it so inspiring. But one of the memories I have of our last visit is you and I took a picture in front of that part of the Berlin Wall that they have there. You know, a big, have you been to the Reagan Library, sir?
For presidential debate.
Yeah, of course you were, yeah. So it's an amazing experience, but when you were talking, it made me think of the saying that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot, which is exactly your point.
Exactly, and you know, and talk about the Berlin Wall, I was in Berlin in a youth hostel, Jugendherberge, on August 13th, 1961. I was a student over there at the University of Munich. The day they did the wall, in fact, I woke up, I was the only American in the youth hostel, I was with all my German colleagues, and we woke up and it was horrible. You know, Ronald Reagan won the Third World War without firing a shot. And Ronald Reagan sat down with Gorbachev, as Trump will with Putin, as Trump will with Xi, and solved these problems in talking and peace rather than shooting guns. This is why I really don't like what's going on here. If you were Putin and sat with Joe Biden for 3 hours in a conversation, just the two of you, what do you think his thoughts would be about Biden's competence? If you sat down with Donald Trump for 3 hours and had a conversation, woohoo, I'm not taking that guy on.
Yeah, right.
I mean, this is why we need a strong leadership, not weak. And that's the best plan for prosperity and peace in our time.
So this next chart is exactly what you were just talking about, Arthur. I should have put this up a minute ago, that the blue line shows the share of taxes paid by the rich, and the red line is the reduction in the Trump tax cut. I think there's a very famous curve about this called the Laffer curve, but you see the Laffer curve effect here, that we reduced the rate and we got more revenue.
Well, if you look at, I finished just a book about a year ago, which is Taxes Have Consequences, which I did with Dr. Gene Sinkfield and Dr. Brian Dimitrovic as well. In that book, we have the complete history of the U.S. income tax from 1913 to the present. We have every single tax return. This is not, I can imagine if you raise taxes on the rich, you collect more money and can help the poor, but I can also imagine if you raise taxes on the rich, they shelter their income more, you collect less revenue, and the poor get hammered. You know, this is about facts, not how you feel. And all these guys up there, Jason Furman and Saez and Piketty and all these yahoos who talk about this stuff don't look at the facts. Every single time we've raised tax rates on the rich, the economy has underperformed, Every single time we've raised tax on the rich, tax revenues from the rich have gone down, not up. And every time we've raised tax rates on the rich, the poor have been hammered. Symmetrically, every time we've cut tax on the rich, we've had a boom. Look at the Reagan go-go 60s. Look at Reagan 80s. Look at the Kennedy go-go 60s. Look at the Harding-Coolidge. Every time we've lowered tax rates on the rich, tax revenues have gone up. Here's what you're saying. And every time we've lowered tax rates on the rich, the primary beneficiaries have been the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised. If you want to help people, don't use taxes to do it. You cannot tax an economy into prosperity. Hello?
Amen. All right, let's get to the next one. This is just how people rate the economy. It's clear. Even the most recent numbers show only 1 in 4 Americans rate the economy as good or great, whereas under Trump it was about 2 or 3. So that's a huge problem for Biden, obviously. This is a critical one. You may have seen this crazy report by one of these left-wing groups recently that said Trump has a worse record on the debt than Biden. That's ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous. So what we did is looked at the 10-year forecast for when Trump left office. And by the way, I do think Trump spent too much money. I love Donald Trump, but I think they spent too much. But this was the forecast for what the debt would happen with the debt when Trump left office, according to the Congressional Budget Office. The red pillars are the Trump debt, which was going to go through the roof anyway, but Biden has raised the debt by $7 trillion over 10 years, $7 trillion. The average deficit under Trump, not counting 2020 and 21, the 2 COVID years, $750 billion under Trump, $1.5 trillion under Biden. So anyone who says that Biden is going to be better on the debt, I just don't understand. There it again. You've got to explain why your economist friends are saying these stupid things. All right, credit card debt, way up. I'll just kind of speed through these now. This is a really good one. One of our scholars at Unleash Prosperity is Casey Mulligan, who's one of the top. He was on the Council of Economic Advisors for Trump. And he's done this new study on what do regulations cost. Because as you know, Harold, a lot of these regulations are kind of, you feel them as a businessman, but the average consumer and homeowner doesn't really feel the direct effect of these regulations. And so what Casey did is look at, well, what do they really cost people when you hammer your businesses and enforce all sorts of new rules on businesses that raise their costs? Under Trump was a deregulator. He deregulated. It saved the average family about $10,000 over their lifetime. Under Biden, his regulations have cost the average household about $45,000. That's an invisible tax on the American household. Illegal immigration. This is a chart that I showed President Trump a number of months ago. Even he was surprised by these numbers. But the amount of, by the way, we're all very pro legal immigration. We need more legal immigrants. They're great benefits to our country. But we have got to stop illegal immigration in this country. It's that simple. And you can see that. We've had 4 to 5 times more illegal immigration under Trump than Biden. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
You don't want to hear my comments.
Okay, all right. So that's basically it. That's kind of what the book is about. But my point is, if you look at those, almost virtually every single one of these, I thought we had one on energy. Oh, we do. I want to show this one on, this gets to your realm, and I'd like your reaction to some of these, Harold. So this is gas prices. Gas prices are now about $1.25 a gallon higher than they were under Trump. You can see every year gas prices were lower under Trump than Biden, and that's because we had a surge in output. If you increase the supply of something, I learned from you get lower prices. This is one I just find very interesting. I mean, does anybody in this room really believe that President Xi cares about climate change? I mean, the only 2 people in the world who believe that are probably, Joe Biden and who is his climate change czar? John Kerry, right. But look at this. I mean, you can see and by the way, I'm a big fan of coal. This country was built on coal. I know you're an oil and gas guy, but I like coal too. We have the cleanest coal and we have the most coal in the world. We're shutting down our coal plants, and you see that line. You see that line going right up there? That's China. Yeah. So China is not reducing their output.
Can you go back to the SBR a couple slides?
Sorry?
You missed SBR.
I missed one?
SBR.
Oh, yeah. Where is that? I thought I had that. Oh, there it is, yeah. So look at this. I mean, this is the way they're artificially propping up the price of gas, right? They're drawing down our strategic reserve, and that this is wholly irresponsible. I'd like your reaction to these.
Well, just manipulating gasoline prices. You know, that's the whole purpose for drawing down SBR. So we've seen it in the past. Clinton did it, and here we saw it again. So it is irresponsible. You know, now we're very vulnerable. In case of war, in case you had to draw something real fast, you wouldn't have it. So it's totally irresponsible.
So the reason I wanted you up here is I'd like to ask you if Trump is, because Biden's running around the country saying, oh, we're producing more oil than ever before. I missed, you know, on one hand he says we're trying to get to net zero. On the other hand, he's saying that, you know, we're producing more. We're estimating that we could be producing about 3 million more barrels a day. But I'd like, if you had, let me put it like this, Harold. If Trump gets back in the White House, how much more oil do you think we could be producing?
Well, first of all, Biden has nothing to do with what we're producing.
Right.
I mean, that started 30 years ago, you know, basically with the energy renaissance that was kicked off by horizontal drilling. That's where it started, our ability to access the shales and produce those shales. The Bakken is a huge example of that in North Dakota, and all the other shale basins that we're today producing. So that started 30 years ago. So take him out of the picture, had nothing to do with it. So anyway, we do have excess production we could produce, but he's burdened everybody down with all the regulation,
Right.
still piling them on. Took 26% of the land mass of the U.S. off the table with the federal lands.
Right.
We've always developed federal lands, and a lot of it is very lucrative for oil and gas production in the western states, Wyoming, you know, Montana, a whole lot of federal lands out there that's off the table. Gulf of Mexico, not leasing, not permitting wells. I mean, it takes a huge toll. So yes, there's a lot of production that we could have that would lower the cost of natural gas and oil.
Yeah, and that's a big deal for the U.S. economy. I mean, it's like a tax cut.
Well, it's a huge deal. Trump got it. When I explained to him what the energy renaissance was in 2012, over a dozen years ago, you know, quickly he got it. He said, you know, that could drive the U.S. economy, couldn't it? Oh, yeah?
Right.
He got it.
So I should mention, I forgot to mention this about Harold Hamm, that well, Kristen, you know this story. You kept, Kristen, who works for Continental, kept calling me when I was at the Wall Street Journal. This was, what, 10, 12 years ago, I don't even remember. You got to meet Harold Hamm. He was doing amazing things, and you know this you know, shale revolution, which I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about it. What was going on in North Dakota and in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and finally, you know, we sat down and had lunch across the street from the Wall Street Journal. It turned into about a 2.5-hour lunch, and I remember that you said you coined the frame Saudi America. And thanks to people like Harold Hamm, we did become Saudi America. So you are a great, great patriot for what you did. Thank you.
Well, thanks, David. A whole lot of other people involved. It's all the hardworking oil and gas people, you know, that helped break the code and do what we're doing today. So, you know, it wasn't just me, but you know, we've come a long ways. It's a wonderful story. Read Game Changer. Mm-hmm. You know, the book that was given here at RNC. Everybody should understand that story.
Yeah.
And what brought the energy renaissance about, and what it took to do it. So, you know, you deserve it to know the truth. You deserve to know those facts.
So last thing for you, Harold, and then I'll let you stand down. We still hear talk about peak oil, and we still hear talk about that we're running out of energy, and that, you know, it's the fracking boom is over and so on. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's not over, but this is something that develops not easily. The shales are very resistant to development, if you would. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to free that oil in those shales. So it's going to take a long time to finish that development. We're seeing that in North Dakota. How many times have they written it off? Said, oh boy, that's going to peak, that's over. Really? I don't think so. We just passed 5 billion
Wow.
barrel mark in
Amazing.
production. We've probably got another 25 to go. So,
Ladies and
it's gonna
gentlemen,
take a long
an
time.
American hero, Harold Hamm. Thank you, Harold, for being here. Appreciate it. I'll show you just a couple more, and then we'll move on, because these are, this is just the last one, and I want your reaction to this, Arthur. So you taught me this, when you look at stock market returns, you have to look at stock market returns adjusted for inflation. Is that correct? Right. Because people invest to make money after inflation, not before inflation. Did I get that right? Okay. So it is, the market has been up under Biden, but not nearly as much as it was under Trump. And when you inflation adjust these numbers, you can see this one is, I can't see if that's S&P or, I think that one's the S&P, much higher under Trump. This one is NASDAQ. Look at that. I mean, much, much higher returns under Trump. And this is the Dow. And so in real terms, much higher returns. What do you have to say about that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, those are just the facts, ma'am.
I mean, would you rather invest at the beginning of Biden or the beginning of Trump? Hello. I mean,
And then this one is also teed up for you. It is this is really scary, folks. I mean, people aren't paying attention to this, that Biden, to his credit, he's telling us what he will do if he's reelected. I mean, most of the time Democrats run in the middle and say, oh, I'm a moderate Democrat. Biden isn't moving that way. He's moved to the left. So he wants to raise the capital gains tax. He wants to raise the corporate rate. He also, and you got to explain, he wants to raise tax on unrealized capital gains, double the capital gains rate. What is the effect of all that?
Well, again, I'll take you back to the book. If any of you haven't looked at it, Taxes Have Consequences goes through the history of the U.S. income. We have all of this in there, the data. We have the numbers. We know what happens when they raise the capital gains tax rate. We know what happens when they lower it. We know what happens they raise corporate rate. They don't. Payroll taxes, all of these things. Look at the facts. You cannot tax an economy into prosperity. I'm just telling you. A poor person cannot spend himself into wealth. It's just plain common sense. And when you look at this stuff, you look at what Biden's proposing, it's anti-academic, it's anti-factual, and it's not even good politics there. I mean, it's just awful stuff, and if he were to be able to get through doing this, you would have a single problem for the next 4 years beyond reproach. I mean, it's terrible.
So this is the last one, that may be one of the most important ones, and this is what Trump did for minorities. So under Donald Trump, we had the lowest unemployment rate ever for Black Americans. We had the lowest unemployment rate ever for Hispanic Americans. We had the lowest poverty rate ever for Black Americans, and we had the lowest poverty rate ever for Hispanic Americans. So, Arthur, maybe you can explain to me how he's a racist. No, I mean, seriously.
Well,
I mean,
I'm not going to seriously take that.
How can they say
just, if
a
you
guy
look
who's
at
done more for
Benjamin
minority-
Hook said it very perfectly. He said, basically blacks are hired last and fired first. And the only way we're going to get jobs and keep jobs is there are damn many jobs out there that we have to be employed. There is nothing more pro-growth, more pro-poor, more pro-minority, more pro-less educated than economic growth, to where there's so many jobs, the people are brought into the mainstream. And let me tell you, when you look at property taxes, you look at all these other, they are the most racist, most anti-poor policies in the world. They prohibit people from coming into the mainstream. We need something like enterprise zones, where we have tax-free zones in the inner city, which I put out in 1974 with Reagan and Kemp. And, we need to have tax-free zones to bring these people back into the mainstream, to share our prosperity with our brothers and sisters in this country that have not had the advantages of economic growth because they live in areas which are so high. Poverty traps. I mean, if you're an inner city family of 4, well, let me just give you the one in Philadelphia. Single mother, raising 2 kids, all right? She earns $29,000. If you go through that single mother's total after-tax wages in Philadelphia, I'll take out the payroll taxes and all the others, you get her after-tax income. You with me? If you then look at the eligibility for welfare, you can go through all the different welfare programs and see what she's eligible for with the 2 kids, and you get that, and you add that to the amount she makes after tax. You with me? That's her total spending power earning $29,000 a year income. Now, this woman has gumption, she has drive, she has ambition, she has initiative, and she goes out and works her tail off in her free time and gets good skills and things, and she now increases her income from $29,000 to $58,000. She's increased her real income, and you go through the same calculation. You take that $58,000 and you subtract out all the taxes she pays, and you've got her after-tax income. You know, the more you make, the more they tax you. So tax increase
And
again.
she loses benefits.
Yeah, well, then you go through the benefits, which is the more you make, the less you get. And you go through and add it up. The total spending power she would have at $58,000 a year income versus $29,000 a year income is less than it was at $29,000. She faces a marginal tax rate of over 100%. That's what we call the poverty trap. If you ever want to bring people into the mainstream, look at Ferguson, look at my Huff area of Cleveland, look at all these. You want to bring them back in, you need to bring tax-free zones in there to allow these people to get into the mainstream, to become prosperous, and share in our way of life. And this Donald Trump is perfectly into all the way, and Biden is totally against. The more you pay him, Biden wants to pay people not to work, pay people to be poor, and no wonder they stay poor. You need to have this poverty trap gotten rid of, and economic growth is the only answer.
So we just got a few minutes left. And before you step down, I want, you know, in our book, you wrote the last chapter of our book, which is about the agenda, three or four things that you think are most important for Trump to do in his second term, and I'd love to hear what those are.
My advice to the president, it's just you sort of caution because he can hit you. I mean, but my suggestion would be that to jumpstart this economy, we have a lot of people who are sitting on the sidelines. And they've been sitting on the sidelines, and he needs to jumpstart this economy. And my proposal would be that you would have a 50% waiver of the payroll tax for 18 months and 100% expensing of capital purchases for 18 months. So you make it very, very attractive for people to go to work, and you make it very, very attractive for employers to employ those people. And that's really attractive. And then you have a deadline where it is. So if you don't do it now, you don't get it. And you do the 100% expensing, and this will create a huge increase in incentives for production and bring those people back off the sidelines, back into the mainstream. Our participation rate in the U.S. about 62.5%. When Clinton was in office, by the way, I supported Clinton back then over Bob Dole and the others. I mean, Clinton was a far better president than a lot of those Republicans. And I think it's really time to get our participation rate back up to 66, 67%. And that would jumpstart the economy. And let me tell you, that would solve tons and tons of problems. A temporary payroll tax waiver and a temporary 100% expensing of all capital purchases. And you'll increase the rates of return on employment, production, output right away. And bang, that economy will jump. And if you think 3% is a good growth rate, wait till you see what would happen. Can I just do one last?
And I want to ask
From
you
January 1st, 1983, when the tax cuts finally took effect, Reagan phased in the tax cuts, which was the biggest mistake of all. But our tax cuts took effect on January 1st, 1983. From January 1st, 1983 to June 30th, 1984, how long is that? Is that 18 months? Mm-hmm. Is that a year and a half? Is that 6 quarters of growth?
Yes.
U.S. real GDP during that 6 quarters grew by 12% in real terms. We grew at an annual average growth rate of 8%. Chinese growth rates. We can do it again now with the right policies. We can jumpstart that economy and really create a dream economy, a political economy of growth and prosperity that will be second to none on this planet.
Folks, Arthur Laffer, the greatest economist in the country. He deserves a Nobel Prize. Thank you, Arthur, so much. Great. I'd like to call up Scott Bessent and Jason Tenner because... What's that?
Charlie Hurt is here. Charlie Hurt is here.
Oh, and Charlie, come on up here, Charlie, as well.
Shall I get out of here?
Yeah, you're done.
Hey! Can I just say one thing? We have so many wonderful people here, but I just wanted to recognize Congressman Burgess Owens, Congressman Andy Ogles, Congressman Tom Tiffany, and 2 people from Pennsylvania, I hope save the day. We have this head of the Pennsylvania Senate, Kim Ward, who works very hard on school choice, Senator Greg Rothman, and Christine Toretti, great Pennsylvania Patriots.
So, Congressman Owens, you just heard, I want to turn to you if I may. You just heard what Arthur Laffer had to say about Republicans winning the minority vote. I'd love to hear your reaction to that.
I left the NFL. I played back in the days when the Raiders used to win football games all the time. And I left the NFL in 1983. And I left to begin a business with the dream that if we can, some kind of way, recapture our kids, teach them the things that I grew up with, of faith, family, free market education, that we can really make an impact on our country. I think right now what's happening, this has been a dream of mine for a long time, what's happening with the Hispanic, the black community, now the Jewish community, we're going back to our roots. We're going back to our conservative roots. As we do that and bring our communities back from the abyss of socialism and Marxism, we bring our entire country back. You have to understand the Democratic Party has been addicted to the black vote. We're now realizing we don't want to be that substance anymore. We want to live the American dream like everybody else does. And we're going to see a game changer, my friends, like I did 40 years ago. Once we get it, once we realize we've been lied to, we will never go back. So I'm excited about where we are right now. Very exciting times in our country, so let's make it happen. And President Donald Trump is the right answer for all of us, for sure.
Okay, so let me start with you, Scott Bessent. You are one of the leading financial minds in America, have made a lot of money in the financial markets, have been a strong supporter of Donald Trump. You talk to him all the time. You see Scott on Fox News all the time, Fox Business News, as well as Jason and Charlie, of course. You're talking to Trump. What do you think he needs to be doing, in addition to the things we've been talking about? What does he need to do to get this economy going? Because you're talking to him all the time.
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot of what you said. I suggested to him that his good friend Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister of Japan, who was tragically assassinated, had something called the 3 arrows. And I suggested to President Trump he had a similar 3 arrows. And Steve, just to back up a little, I have a good life. I used to always say I want fortune, not fame. But I've come out from behind my desk in this election cycle because I do believe that 2024, 2025 is the last chance for us to grow our way out of this massive debt that the Biden administration has put us under. And if you hear Lael Brainerd, the former Fed vice chair, it was her idea to get rid of the average inflation targeting right when inflation took off. But she's now head of the chair of the National Economic Council, and she gave a speech last year at the Economic Club of New York, and it's just the tax program that you showed. So they have spent, and now I think they want to put the U.S. economy in what I call an economic respirator, or a ventilator. And you go on a ventilator because you're sick, and 50% of the time you don't come out. And I think we're about to go on, they want to put us on an economic ventilator a la European-style social democracy. So what would I do to grow out? I think we need to freeze, not cut discretionary spending, except for defense. I think, as Dr. Laffer said, defense is an investment that you never hope to use. President Reagan took defense spending as a percent of GDP from about 4% up to 5.5%. Progressives said, he's a warmonger. Budget hawks said, you're crazy, you're going to blow out the deficit. And you know what? Now we're at 3% of GDP because he took down the Soviet Union. So freeze discretionary spending, except for the defense, deregulate, 3% real economic growth, have a commitment to bring the budget deficit down to by 2028 to 3%. As a financial markets person, I can tell you financial markets will respond to that very well. So give forward guidance on that. I told the president, you didn't get us to the 7%. You don't have to get us to 0. Entitlement reform, you can't do the big entitlement reform until you get the current house in order. and the current House is on fire. So 3% real economic growth, 3% deficit to GDP by 2028, and to your point, 3 million more crude equivalents per day. So crude and gas, we're producing about 20 million, so up that about 15%. And I've been looking too, the other three could be Saudi Arabia is holding off 3 million barrels of production a day. Maybe convince our friends in the kingdom that the higher oil prices or lower oil prices, good economy, are better for them and the world.
So, great answer. I want to turn to you, Charlie. You're the world's best economist, aren't you?
My goodness. Now, I assume there's going to be a quiz on all of this after breakfast.
So
I'm going to ruin the curve for all of you.
well, by the way, this guy does an amazing job at Fox News, doesn't he? We love what you do. Give us assessment of where you think this race is. We've seen, as one of the previous speakers said, the last 3 weeks, I think it was Governor Burgum was saying that, the last 3 weeks have been an amazing change. But how do you, look, I worry a little bit, of irrational exuberance on the side of Republicans. By the way, we're a 501c3, we're a non-partisan group. But, a lot can happen, a lot can change in the next 3 months. But how do you see things right now?
Well, also, we've been so abused for so long, it's kind of hard to accept good news and think that this actually might work out the way it looks like it's going to work out. And I'm terrified. But I have to say that, and just to step back, I do think that the last 6 months, the last 12 months, and the last week have probably been the most extraordinary week in our political lives. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of hard to wrap your brain around it. And every single day, something else happens, and you can't. It's hard to put it in focus. Obviously, Saturday night was one of the most extraordinary things I know that in my time covering politics I've ever seen or been through or covered. But I also have to say that the Monday and Tuesday this week were pretty extraordinary as well. The idea that that a federal judge would throw out probably the most dangerous of the cases that were brought against Donald Trump on one day, and it really does sort of, there are a lot of people who don't like Donald Trump, if you haven't heard. And a lot of those people, even though they don't like Donald Trump, they do love America, and they do love the system of justice. And I've been struck by how many of those people I've heard from who, again, don't like Donald Trump, but they became very upset when they began to realize that, hey, you know what? Actually, maybe the Biden Justice Department is actually using the Justice Department against the president. And when you have a jury in New York City that can't even agree on what the crime is, and nobody seems to know what the crime is, and he gets convicted of 34 felonies for that, and then you start having these cases get blown out of the water, it just sort of buttresses this idea that, man, maybe they really are using our most precious justice system in order to, and it's not just to go after Donald Trump, it's to re-empower themselves, which is kind of defies the whole point of this whole thing that we're trying to do in America. And then secondly, part of that, on Tuesday, you have a sitting Democrat member of the Senate convicted on a crime that nobody has any doubt what the crime was. When you have gold bars in a jacket with your name on it in your wife's closet, you don't need you don't need to bring Jonathan Turley out to explain why that's there's a problem there, and it's pretty obvious. And the other thing is, it was an international bribery scheme that he was running. Of course, his second one, which he managed to skate on the first one, which is pretty funny. Who does that? But it's also, he was doing it from the Senate as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
So brazen.
So brazen,
Yeah.
but it's also the exact same perch that Joe Biden held when he was in the United States Senate. And of course, everybody kind of has in the back of their mind that maybe this guy might be, I don't know, some people in his family might be selling access to the White House and to foreign actors. And so, I mean, and obviously, the press is doing all they can to try to portray Republicans as being disunited and Donald Trump as being a force of chaos and a threat to democracy. And then you wind up with what we've seen the last couple of days. And granted, I will say, I didn't ever expect to see someone with a tattoo on her forehead speaking at the Republican convention, but it was entertaining. I'm here for this. It was entertaining, and I loved what she said. By the way, I thought it was really quite interesting. But to have this going on here, and then you have the top leaders in the Democrat Party, and then top Democrats in the media all talking about how terrible their presidential nominee is, and how can they just sort of quietly do an online vote to give him the nomination so that it doesn't get away from him. People start to clear-headed people have to start thinking, okay, I've been lied to for a long time, and if we can convince people that they're being lied to.
So speaking of that, and Jason, I want to get you in a minute, but I want to ask Charlie about, because you're a journalist. That's your profession, and it seems to me your profession has a lot of explaining. I mean, you think? To say the least, because I really believe the whole Joe Biden story is one of the greatest cover-ups ever. They've lied to the American, and look, we know that the Democratic Party apparatchiks, they've lied to us. But the media is supposed to be the watchdogs here, right? Yeah. I mean, they're the ones who exposed Watergate and all these things. And here you have this president, probably wasn't even fit to be president. Remember, they locked him in the basement for a year and to never come
Now we know why.
And they won with that strategy. And everyone in the media, all your colleagues knew about Joe Biden's. Yeah. So what's going on here? I mean,
So I started out in newspapers. All I've ever wanted to do all my life is work in newspapers. And then I wound up in Washington covering politics. I loved it. It was, again, all I've ever wanted to do. But there came a point, sometime in the late aughts, where I realized that, you know what, I can no longer pretend to take Democrats seriously. And it was actually probably the beginning of that was having to cover the John Kerry campaign. And it sort of defied it was a Herculean task to try to take the guy seriously. And so at some point I realized I could no longer pretend to take these people seriously. And so I left the reporting side of things and went over to the opinion side. And I hope I did that in the honorable way. The problem is most of my colleagues don't ever do that. They're just like, oh, I'll stay here and corrupt everything from the news side. And I think it started with Barack Obama, because this guy came along and everybody was like, man, this guy's awesome. And I remember at the time thinking he was a very impressive guy. And I loved it, even though he had absolutely no explanation. There was no record to prove why he was great. It was just that he was a great story and he looked good. And so at that moment, they became boosters for him. And what we didn't realize was at the same time, they were not only becoming these enormous boosters for this guy that was like he was like
Messiah,
a deity.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And, but when somebody else came along that Barack Obama, of course, paved the way for, who was quite different from Barack Obama, and especially in terms of having a record that people believed in, they didn't put their weapons down. They just went after that guy. And they have completely, the New York Times, my father still reads the New York Times, and he sends me stuff. I'm like, why do you read this? I can read a story and figure out what they're making up, but it's too exhausting. It's a waste of time. And the Washington Post is even more embarrassing. And so they're not even pretending. The media has always been sort of urbane and kind of leaning liberal, kind of in a funny way. But this is not that. This is completely, they're the King's Guard now. Yeah. And sticking up for establishment and authority and government, which is not why I got into the news business. I got into the news business to try to expose that and challenge it.
Well, now we need somebody to watch the watchdogs.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Jason, you're one of the top, what I say, the political finance guys, because you fall in both of these camps at Strategis, and Strategis is an amazing. I read your stuff all the time, which is why I'm so honored to have you here.
Thank you.
You give us your sense of things. I'm worried. We had a little discussion last night at a small dinner, and I think it was Larry Kudlow who made the point that this rally we've seen in the market the last 2 days. I haven't seen what's happening today yet, but, you know, big burst in the stock market. May have been a, you know, a Trump effect. But, you know, there's no question the stock market's been on a rally. That would seem to help Biden, right? Because if the market's doing well, the economy is doing well before the election, then, you know, people are, you know, less likely to vote for change. How do you see this all playing out?
Yeah, I think, and Steve, thank you for having me here. I'm somewhat skeptical. First of all, I would say the rally, there's no doubt in my mind, the last couple of days has been a result of the increase in the likelihood that President Trump will win.
And he's moved up in the,
He's
not
moved
the
up
polls, but the betting markets.
In the predicted markets, the last time I saw, I think it was at 69. It's maybe higher than that. That was on Monday.
And so the investors are watching that.
Investors are watching that. And then if you look at the character of the rally that you've seen in the stock market over the last 2 days, the sectors that would benefit most from President Trump winning, financials and energy in particular, have done the best. And the sectors like renewable energy and companies like First Solar have gotten run over. So
that's an indication that there's a Trump rally.
It is a
well,
Trump
hold
rally.
on.
And
I mean, Harold Hamm, you know, who's better for the energy industry, Trump or Biden? Okay, so it just makes your point.
One of the ironies I'd say to Mr. Hamm and to you, though, is that if you're an investor in energy companies, believe it or not, the best performing sector in the Biden administration has been the energy sector, but much greater than the technology sector. And President Trump, as we know, loves the energy sector, which is fantastic. In my opinion, we're the only country in the history of economic history that is ignoring our own natural resources. I mean, I can't, it's hard to believe. But during the Trump administration, it was very pro-energy. The energy stocks didn't do particularly well, but that was because we were producing a lot of oil. And so this gets back to your question, which is I'm not convinced the stock market rally is going to be that helpful, or it clearly has not been that helpful for the Democrats or President Biden, because I think a lot of the policies are enormously regressive. QE for 12 years was terrific for rich people. If you had a private equity firm or a venture capital firm, you did great. If you were just a regular guy or gal with a savings account, you got 0 for 12 years, okay? The renewable energy renaissance, if you will, is terrific for wealthy people who want to buy electric vehicle toys to go to the country club with. But if you're just a regular person that has to fill up your tank every once in a while, it's not so great. And I would say similarly with financial assets, more than 50% of households own financial assets, so obviously the stock market moving higher is better. The problem, though, is that real wages, the way we measure them, we measure them through this thing called the Common Man CPI. The Common Man, hold on.
Hello? Hello?
Well, we'll try to fix that, but you're just have to shout.
I'll just shout.
Yeah.
We have something called the Common Man CPI. And what we do, unlike the people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics who exclude food and energy, and they call that core CPI. And I don't know about you, but eating and staying warm to me is pretty core, okay? So we created an index called the Common Man CPI. Common Man, it's not a gender thing. It's Aaron Copland's fanfare for the Common Man. But we just include food, energy, shelter, children's clothing, utilities, and insurance. So these are things you have to buy come hell or high water every day, every week, every month. If you look at that during the Trump administration, wages exceeded the Common Man CPI. If you look at it during the Biden administration, the standard of living has declined by 7% for the common man. Wages have trailed the Common Man CPI by 7% over the last 3 years. And that's why the boom in the stock market, I don't think, has redounded particularly well to the Biden administration, because average people are literally just trying to get from one day to the next.
So we just have a few minutes left for this panel, and I just want to go down the line and ask you what we've been asking everyone up here, which is you're one of Trump's top economic advisors. What are the one or two things you think he should do right out of the gate? What are the top 2 priorities? Well, Scott, start with you, Scott. I don't know if that's working or not.
Yeah, he should make it clear that he is going to tackle the budget deficit because everyone thinks that he is prolific, and then he should implement the Art Laffer's tax policies to jumpstart the economy. And I think he should.
Hello. Even though.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
All right.
Hello.
Oh, mine's on now.
On.
Yeah, I think mine's on now.
No, they're not on. But I think they're in the streaming thing.
Oh, okay. So anyway, make it known that he is fiscally responsible, the tax cutter, and the announce that he is going to follow through at a level on the deportations. There are 1.5 million final orders of deportation for illegal immigrants, and we should give them 60 or 90 days to leave.
I would say drill, baby, drill. And then I also say there's not only economic prosperity, there's cultural prosperity as well. And I would reinstitute a drug war. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, I would. I agree about the deportations, the wall, seal the border, obviously drilling. But the other thing, speaking as a guy that follows politics mainly, I would demonstrate that actually that elections do have consequences, as we were famously warned, and actually take control of the federal government. And as we are going through what we're going through, I wouldn't be surprised if at this point Donald Trump didn't wind up getting elected with a stronger majority in the House and with a majority in the Senate. And Donald Trump is the only guy that I've ever covered in politics who is willing to spend his political capital on something other than self-preservation. He is a guy who is willing, he wants to accomplish things and get things done. And I hope that he takes that victory, and I hope there are other victories, and he demonstrates to Americans that actually you still do have control over the federal government and do everything that it takes to wrangle back control of this out-of-control federal government. And I used to dream that Donald Trump would go through and annihilate the Department of Labor and take over the building, and his family would steal the building and turn it into a casino, and then it would go bankrupt, and then America would be better off. And
Folks,
then we could just go through a bunch of those.
This has been a great panel. Charlie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason, Scott. We have one more panel, and then we will wrap up. Thank you, gentlemen. Wonderful job. David Malpass, please come on up here, and Lee Rizzuto, can you come on up, and we'll do. I know we were expecting one or two of the senators to come by. I don't know if they've actually arrived. Is he here? Okay, well, good. Well, when he gets here, just bring him on up. So, David Malpass, by the way, you all know, has been one of the leading Wall Street economists, was with Bear Stearns and many other firms, and then was number 2 or 3 in the Treasury Department under Trump and under Steve Mnuchin, and then had the honor of being the president of the World Bank. And he was the best president of the World Bank we ever had, but that's a very low bar. Anyway, David, thanks so much for being here. Okay, give us the global, a quick kind of global situation. I'm worried that some of these countries are moving left. I'm worried about maybe Mexico, some of the European countries. You saw what happened in France. If the U.S. goes left with a Biden re-election, I really worry about not just the U.S., but the whole world economy. And what Reagan really showed us, and Trump too, is that when the United States gets it right, most of the rest of the world follows our lead. When we get it wrong, they go over the cliff with us. So give us your assessment.
Thanks, Stephen. Good to see everybody. I came to Washington in 1983 for Reagan, and it was inspired by that. The world was at stake, and critical in that was lifting people's median income. So this is the same core theme that we're talking about now. J.D. Vance talks about it in rural areas. President Trump talks about it. Nope, that'll be better. So there is the need for inspiration. I looked up over those years at Art Laffer because he was articulating. I looked up to Jack Kemp, who was instrumental in talking about the opportunity society and how do you get median income up. So as we're looking at it now, look at the elections going on. Socialism is still in play. So in Europe, in France, President Macron organized the election so that the left won. And they are already talking about things that would push downward France's median income.
We're talking about like 60, 70, 80% tax rates.
Tax rates and a wealth tax, which we know the impact of that. And then on the British side, they have already shut off the exploration for energy. So that takes me to an issue. We've heard about energy and we understand the importance of it. Harold Hamm engineered a revolution of that by going down 2 miles and turning to the side. That took explanation to people. My view is we have the same opportunity through currencies. Currencies, as you look around the world, everybody in the world is working for money that has some kind of value. So as we think about it, at the core of the global financial system is money. Reagan understood that. He came in, and very interestingly, markets understood that. We heard Scott point out that markets will get the idea early. Remember in 1982, when Reagan came in, the stock market started going up in August of '82. Art Laffer was explaining to us that the tax cut didn't actually come into effect until January of '83, but the markets looked ahead. So think as Donald Trump comes in and says, we're going to have a better economy that raises median income, people are going to look ahead at that. People will start building houses because they know there will be people with income enough to buy the houses. That automatically then begins to improve the monetary policy of the country because the inflation expectations go down instead of what they're doing right now going up. And the central bank has an opportunity to cut. So I want to inspire people that there is as big an opportunity in global central banks as there is in energy, and there is as big a cover-up of the failed nature of the thinking process. Think what Harold Hamm had to do. He had to convince people. They would say, oh, there's no natural gas down there. That's solid rock. And he'd say, no, let me explain it to you. And then they'd say, well, you can't get to it because it's too expensive. So if we have a minute, I want to explain why that opportunity. We are so far off right now in the world's handling of currencies and of central banking as we are on energy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because, monetary policy, as you know, can be pretty boring, can put people to sleep, so I don't want to do that. My friend Steve Forbes used to say if he ever got stuck on the middle chair of a middle seat in a plane, he'd start talking about monetary policy and everybody would clear out of the seat. So, and it works every time. But, so let's keep this really simple for people. I was very pleased to see in the platform that it talks about the need for a strong and stable dollar. You obviously agree with that. And it also says that we need to maintain what I think is one of America's great comparative advantages, that we are the world reserve currency. So can you keep this very simple? Yeah. And it seems to me those are pretty much the cornerstones of a strong monetary policy and also America's global leadership.
That's right. So if we have that as a goal and we say 20 years from now, 50 years from now, the dollar is going to be the world's reserve currency, it's going to have been as a good store of value over that period of time, then yields go down and more investment takes place. We're right now in this odd world where the Fed uses models that says in order to get inflation down, you have to have higher unemployment. Well, we heard Art talking about the participation rate and it's still not being high enough. We need lots more people employed so that they can make things and drive prices down. And that's simply not in central banking right now. I went to international meetings, one after another, where there is a cover-up. We've talked about it, of Joe Biden's age and his the weakness of the U.S. A cover-up in the foreign policy mistakes. Remember how devastating Afghanistan was, and then there'd be an international meeting where people wouldn't talk about it. There's the war in Ukraine going on, and people are covering up the weakness of the strategy that's unfolding. And so the same, and I just want to make the point that they talked for years about having a policy that would keep inflation at zero, and they could have interest rates at zero. There's no economic theory that justifies 0% interest rates, and yet they would all look at each other and say, isn't it great that we have rates at zero? And then the Germans would say, no, we need them at negative. So to put it in perspective, just recognize there's as big a mistake as it was in energy before Harold Hamm.
So last question for you, then I want to turn to Lee. You're one of the 3 or 4 people who could be the next Fed chairman, and we all agree that Jerome Powell has to go. Do you think that Trump, you've talked to him many times, I mean, does he understand monetary policy? It seems to me he kind of gets it. He's always said to me every time I should never have put Powell in. I said, yes, Mr. I always told Trump that your 2 worst appointments were Jerome Powell, and you should have fired Anthony Fauci on day 1. But do you think Trump kind of gets, I mean, he's not an economist, right? He's a businessman. But do you think he gets monetary policy? Does he get our model?
I'm trying to convey that the difficulty of implementing a change is as much as in every other. Let's say your task is to get the Defense Department to procure weapons in an efficient way where they look ahead. Impossible. People have been knocking their heads against the wall. So on the Federal Reserve, you've really got to recognize, and I think President Trump is very clear on the goal. I want median income to go up, and I would like the interest rates to make sense within the country. Well, does 5.4% interest rate make sense to anybody below the median income? It doesn't. They can't get the construction loans that they need, the inventory loans for their small stores, the things that really drive America are priced out for people right now. So I think that can be very clear to people, but then you have to dig into the model just as much as in fracking or in changing the energy policy. Think of the problem we face on nuclear regulatory policy of getting to actual nuclear power. The government has no means to get from here to there because it's too complicated a problem. And I'm worried that on central banking, we have to recognize it's going to take multiple steps to say you don't want the Fed to be super powerful. But right now, everybody in Washington wants the Federal Reserve to be the regulatory king, the temple. Remember, that was a book about Greenspan, and they want it to be super powerful. And you have to say, wait a minute, I want it to be less important within the global
So that was
economy.
the last point I was going to make with you, and then I want to ask Lee. I'm in favor of, I think most of us at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity are in favor of a price rule. In other words, the Fed shouldn't make this stuff up as they go along, which is what they've been doing. They make up these rules, and then you get all sorts of speculation, whole markets about what the Fed is going to do. Wouldn't it be much more efficient if we all knew what they were going to do? We didn't have to look at the Fed minutes and try to decipher. Remember, Greenspan used to speak in these circumlocutions. We didn't even know what he was saying. Why can't we have a price rule, whether it be a commodity price rule or something like that, so that everyone knows and we don't have, and these people are not, people act as if they're gods or something like that at the Fed. They've got 500 PhDs at the Federal Reserve Board. Why do they need all these people?
That's right, and they all pretend they can predict the GDP growth rate and the inflation rate, which they can't. So I only don't like the word rule. So we have to look at actual prices and say that should influence how people are thinking about the value of money. So but we have a problem. Gold last night, overnight, hit a new all-time record. So we've high. It's moving up.
Why is that?
That's because people are worried about the fiscal deficit, about and Scott just said, we have to be clear on what we're trying to do. I think President Trump can't. I wrote an article because I was in the campaign, but in September of 2016, why this economy needs Trump. And so we have to recognize Hillary Clinton at that time was campaigning on the idea of limits to growth for people, that median income should be low. And Biden is campaigning on that right now. So Trump can campaign on we are going to make it on prosperity and growth, and that is going to help bring production, inflation goes down, and then we'll be able to have interest rates go down.
Let me turn to Lee. Lee Rizzuto has been a kind of partner of ours on a lot of projects. Lee, I really have appreciated what you do. The video that I showed you at the beginning of our event was something that Lee and I put together, and also he's been a co-sponsor of this slideshow we put together. So Lee, you did a fantastic job. Thank you on that. So we've only got about 5 minutes left, but you had some ideas. You talked to Trump pretty regularly, and you had a couple of ideas of how to get this economy going, and I'd love for you to share those.
Great, thank you, and hello to everyone. So just to back up quickly and use as an example, one of the conversations and thoughts that I was able to have with the president was to share not a new opinion, but an opinion that I felt should be brought back to the table, and that is, why is the foreign aid in this country being used as a gift by the American taxpayer? So our politicians want to help our allies, and regardless whether you're an ally or not, I'm pro-support around the world, but I suggested to the president we should make these loans as opposed to taxpayer gifts. And he embraced that, and next thing we got it fast-tracked. Congress jumped on board, and we got it in motion, not 100% as I would like, but we got to keep the pressure on this. So there are solutions.
By the way, I think all welfare, all programs that help people temporarily, even all these COVID programs, should have been in the form of loans, not handouts. And
they're respected and they have value by doing it as such. Yeah. So the next topic that I threw out, which I feel the people in the room will perhaps embrace, and that is, I asked the president, what if on day one of your presidency that we did no longer have an issue at our southern border? What if our immigration could be solved, and how great could your presidency be by not having to deal with that constant issue and cost to the American taxpayer? So my approach, the solution being, the president likes using tariffs as a tool, and he's talked about this in the past also. But now let's take it and jack it up. Most Americans, and perhaps even many politicians, are not aware. We talk about China all the time as though they are our largest trading partner. Actually, Mexico is our largest trading partner. We're doing more business with Mexico than we do with China. So there's literally millions of Mexican jobs that are on the line based on our purchases from Mexico. So if the president on November 6th, not January 20th, when he's sworn in, communicates publicly that we're going to raise tariffs not to 25% as we're doing with China on most of the goods. We're going to raise them to 500% or 1,000% on everything coming from Mexico. However, on January 20th, if they stop facilitating the border crossings, tariffs will be zero. So you, Mexico, it's your choice. You want to continue to do business with America. You enforce the laws and you stop this game playing and you stop enriching the cartels. So there are solutions, and they not always have to be very complicated or costly ones. And this is one that realistically could will work, and could be implemented quite easily.
So, Lee, it's really interesting that you should say this, because actually Trump did adopt that policy when he was president in his first term. He went to the Mexicans and said, I need your help on the border. And the Mexicans said, well, that's your problem, not our problem. And Trump said, well, if you don't help us on the border, we're going to impose, I don't know, 500%, but a larger tariff. But here's the thing. 3 days later, the Mexicans came back and said, we'll help on the border. And it's one of the reasons we saw that huge decline. So this policy, and this is the thing about Trump's trade policy that I think is misunderstood. He really does use tariffs effectively as a bargaining tool. And I've seen it, you've probably seen it too, David, where he basically tells the Europeans, you're gonna pay your NATO dues or you're gonna get hit with a tariff. Guess what? They paid their NATO dues. Mexico, you're gonna help on the border, we're gonna hit you with the tariff. Guess what? They helped on the border. Over and over again with President Xi, he used that. So I think people misunderstood really what Trump was doing. I always say this about Donald Trump. If you wanna understand Donald Trump, you have to read the book, The Art of the Deal. He's one of the greatest negotiators I've ever seen. Folks, we're gonna wrap it up because our time is up.
Just a second.
Oh, yes.
Senator Cruz is here.
Oh, he is fantastic. We've been
And I
waiting for him.
did forget to
Where is he?
mention, I didn't see, but Congressman Victoria Sparks is here. So we're
Fantastic.
delighted to have her. So Senator Cruz.
Come on up. Where is he?
And just while he's coming up here, we want to thank two of our sponsors, the Herald Group and International Bank Shares Corporation, for their support, and many of our donors in here as well. Thank you so much.
Senator, thank you so much for coming. While he's coming up to the stage, you all know Senator Cruz. He is a national hero, and thank you for being here. So great to see you. You know David Malthus, Lee Rizzuto. We've been doing this kind of as an interview process, so if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to ask you a few questions. By the way, I believe the three greatest senators that we have in the United States Senate are Mike Lee, Rand Paul, and Ted Cruz. Don't you agree with that? Those guys are the ones who really believe in limited government. Do you agree on the other two?
They're dear friends of mine, but you always have to leave at least one slot open because there are 99 others who's placed themselves in that slot.
That is true. So are you hopeful about, when you look at a second Trump term, we've been talking a lot about the amazing things that Donald Trump did in his first term. Can he get it done? Are we going to hold the Senate? Will the Congress follow his lead?
So look, I'm hopeful on the upside. I think there's an enormous amount of upside. And it depends obviously on the presidential, but it also depends on the Senate and the House. We've got to win them both. The Senate is a very favorable map. I think the odds are good that we'll win the Senate. And I think if we're winning the White House and winning the Senate, we've got a good chance to win the House. And I hope we grow our margins. Right now, a 2-vote majority is impossible. I really hope we get up in the neighborhood of 10 or more, because then you really have a working majority that you can move forward. There's a lot to do. I think day one will be securing the border. The good news is that can be done predominantly on the executive side. I have every confidence that on January 20th of next year, we will see the border crisis end, and it will end because Donald Trump will end catch and release. It's actually very simple. The crisis was caused by Biden's unilateral action. It can be uncaused. It can be resolved by Trump's unilateral action. I think we will also see a dramatic difference on foreign policy. We've had 3.5 years of Biden's weakness to our enemies all across the globe. I think that will end in January of next year. I think that will move us much more in the direction of peace and prosperity. On the economic side, you know, your former employee, the Wall Street Journal, described this as the $6 trillion election, and I think that is unquestionably right.
What did they mean by that?
Well, on the downside, if Biden is there, he has pledged to oppose extending the tax cuts. Most of the tax cuts expire next year. You're looking at trillions of dollars of tax increases. Now, in modern times, there is only one presidential candidate who has campaigned on trillions of dollars of tax increases. His name was Walter Mondale. You remember well. Yeah. He stood across from Ronald Reagan and said in the debate, he said, both of us up here will raise your taxes. He won't tell you, I just did. And Mondale lost 49 states. So the last time that was tried, it was not a good strategy. Joe Biden's trying it again. On the flip side...
But it's soak the rich. Soak the rich.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the millionaires and billionaires and trillionaires and giant corporations, if we just make 110% tax rates, it'll solve everything.
Do you think the public buys that?
I don't, but I don't know... I don't know how many people are voting on it.
Right.
So on our end, we will win if people vote on Biden's record.
Right.
We will win on is your life better than it was 4 years ago. Those are winning issues. The Democrats' plan is the same plan they ran in 2020. It is to demonize Donald Trump personally and to argue he is the devil.
Right.
And that, with some voters, can be effective. On the upside, though, if we have the White House and we have both houses of Congress, I think we have enormous upside. The first major legislative agenda item that will be teed up will be tax cuts. And at a minimum, we'll extend the tax cuts. And so winning means at a minimum extending the tax cuts. I'll tell you, in my view, what I'm going to be pressing is that we are bigger and bolder and see a major tax cut in addition. And look, looking back on the 2017 tax cuts, I was deeply involved in the battles over the tax cuts. It was one of the few times the legislative process actually worked really well and the way it's supposed to, in that it started in the House and it came out of the House and it was a pretty good bill. And it went to the Senate and became a much better bill.
You guys improved our bill.
It made it much more conservative.
Yeah. You helped with the small businesses and that kind of thing.
So pass-throughs, the House version didn't do anything for pass-throughs. It benefited C-Corps and basically left pass-throughs with little to no help. In the Senate, we changed that. That was a big deal. The House version did not repeal the Obamacare individual mandate. And I led the fight in the Senate and said, look, we got to get rid of this individual mandate. We campaigned on it.
I forgot about that.
And we did it. By the way, the House Republicans laughed at us and said, there's no way you guys in the Senate will ever pass that. We're not going to waste our time with it. It's hopeless. We got that done.
Right.
And then actually the bill got even better in conference committee.
Right.
By the way, on the floor, I offered an amendment to expand College 529 savings plans to include K through 12 education. Passed with a 50-50 vote. The vice president broke the tie. It's still the most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that has ever passed. That was on the tax cut the first time around. Now, Steve, here's the biggest mistake we made on the tax cut. We didn't cut everyone's taxes. And that was a very stupid messaging mistake because I think it was a good idea to eliminate the deduction for state and local taxes. There's no reason the federal government should subsidize big blue states who tax like crazy.
Right. Yeah, that was great.
But, and here's the flip side, if the result for an orthodontist who lives in Orange County is you elect Republicans and your taxes go up, we've screwed up badly. And what we should have done is cut the individual rates enough that every single American gets a tax cut. And we did not make that a mandate. And that was foolish because it let Democrats and the media convince the American people, oh, this is just a tax cut for the rich. You don't get a tax cut. Actually, in that direction, I will tell you something that I think is absolute genius from our nominee, Donald Trump, which is no taxes on tips. And I've introduced the legislation in the Senate, no taxes on tips. Have you all heard the story of where that came from?
Yeah, he told me.
From a waitress sitting in Las Vegas, and he's telling all the Republican senators, he said, she came up to me and he said, she was beautiful. She was beautiful. Like, I believe you. And he said she was complaining about all the burden of keeping all the record keeping for tips. And he said he just wrote down on a piece of paper, no taxes for tips. And he said he went out to the rally and said it. And he said they went nuts.
Yeah. By the way, my Democratic friends say, why didn't we think of that? They're
so
jealous.
I will tell you a very interesting thing. I introduced the legislation a couple of weeks ago. Already, both of Nevada's Democrat senators have joined my legislation. And it's, I think Trump wins Nevada on that one issue alone. One of the two senators told me, said, look, 25% of the workers in Nevada are tipped employees, which is why both Democrats immediately said, put me on board on that. So when we ought to be bigger and bolder when it comes to taxes, but we need to also be simpler. And the most simple message that we need to have is every single American is getting a tax cut. I think that's a winning message. I hope we do that this time.
I have a couple of questions for you. Well said. And that tax cut was amazing. You're right. I had forgotten how in the Senate you made our bill better. Yep. And by the way, don't forget, you also did drilling in Alaska, which was ingenious. So we raised money for something, you know, for the taxpayers, for something we wanted to do anyway. So that was fantastic. A couple of things. First of all, one of the things we did in that tax cut that's underappreciated, in my opinion, is we doubled the standard deduction. Now,
Yes.
why was that important? Because if you look at today, do you know what percentage of Americans itemize their deductions now?
I'm going to say 30%.
9%. It was about 30. We took it down to 9. What does that mean? For the average American, it's you just check the box. It's a big simplification measure. By the way, if Biden repeals the Trump tax cut, that means all these people are going to have to go back to itemizing their deduction. Now, here's the interesting point I'm getting at. So today, those 9% are mostly millionaires and billionaires. They're very rich people. So I've got an idea. Why don't we just eliminate all the deductions at this point? The left can't say, oh, that's a tax cut to the rich. It actually would be a tax increase on the rich. And then, you know, this would lead us towards a flat tax and then lower rates. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, look, as you know, and you know well because you and I and Art Laffer worked together in 2016 when I ran for president, I ran on a simple flat tax. And the simple flat tax was 16% for all businesses across the board. It was 10% for all businesses and for all individuals and families. You fill out your taxes on a postcard. We produce the postcard. The great virtue of it is simply geography. It was 4 by 6, and there comes a point where the font can't get any smaller, and the bureaucrats can't add another damn word to the thing.
That's great.
There is value to that. When we did it, we included the deduction for charitable gifts, and I think getting rid of that, you're picking a big fight with every church and charity in America that is probably not worth it in the middle of a tax-cutting fight. But I think getting rid of just about every other deduction makes sense, and simplification is an incredibly powerful benefit. One of the things about the tax cut that was so powerful, that the flat tax that I laid out, is for individuals it was 10% on everything. So that's ordinary income, that's dividends, that's cap gain, short, long, doesn't matter. So think about every decision you're making in your business life that's maximizing tax efficiency, and if suddenly you didn't care, any way you earn money, you're paying 10% on it, it makes no difference how it comes in. You can actually allocate capital to where it would be more efficient, and you look at the projections from that would have produced double-digit increases in after-tax income for every single decile in America. Now, I don't know that we will get as bold as a full flat tax, but I think as close as we can get to that, the better, and certainly what I'm going to be pressing for is bigger, bolder, simpler, and focusing on benefiting working men and women, benefiting the blue-collar party that we've become. The more we entrench that, the more that's a winning coalition going forward.
So one last question for you, Senator. There's a lot of skepticism, I think, of even people in this room, whether Republicans will actually cut spending. And you've been one of the great fiscal hawks in Washington. But look, I mean, Donald Trump did amazing things in his first term, but our record on spending was not very good. Let's just be honest about that. So, you know, a lot of people say neither party really cares about fiscal responsibility. And actually, if you look over the last 10 years, you'd probably have to say that's probably true. You'll be one of the people leading the fight to cut the budget. Our friend Ram Paul said, let's just go back to pre-COVID spending, which I think is a great idea. We could practically balance the budget doing that. How are you going to do it? I mean, if the Republicans take the House, the Senate, they've got the White House, and they don't cut spending, I think people are going to be pretty angry and feel like they've been kind of snookered.
Yeah, look, the skepticism is justified. I will tell you, in the Senate, on any multi-trillion-dollar bill, you get all the Democrats and you get about half the Republicans. And that's just the coalition for a multi-trillion-dollar spending bill is about 80 senators. There are about 20 of us who vote no, and vote no regularly and push to rein in spending. We are slightly less than half the Republican conference. I can tell you when we were doing, all right, let's take Obamacare repeal, which we came within a vote of doing. It was agonizing. Part of Obamacare repeal dealt with spending. It dealt with Medicaid, and it dealt with slowly reducing the rate of growth of Medicaid spending. And the behind closed doors meetings, you would have been horrified to see Republicans from bright red conservative states saying behind closed doors, well, if we cut spending on Medicaid, the press is going to say we're really mean and we hate poor people. And I remember saying, okay, look, they're going to say that anyway. They've already cut the ads of us throwing Granny off the cliff. That's happening regardless. And besides that, it doesn't happen to be true. The proposal that was being considered did not cut a penny. Every year, the spending was billions more than the year before. All it did was slightly reduce the rate of growth each year, so the number the next year was not quite as big as it was going to be, but it was a lot bigger than the number the year before. This will only happen with presidential leadership.
You think Trump could muscle the? I mean, Reagan did it to some extent. He got those Republicans all to fall in line.
Could he
for a
muscle?
while he did, but do you think it's that if he wins with a big margin, that he could actually turn the Republicans back into a fiscally conservative party?
Could he muscle it and lead it? Yes. Is he likely to? No.
And the debt limit comes up in early 2025. Any ideas on that? I've advocated repealing it and replacing it with something that actually works, because right now it only happens after you've spent all the money. You're destined to fund it.
So let me say a couple of things connecting those two. Number one, on the debt limit, what I've systematically argued for Congress to do is use it as leverage to force the federal government to rein in spending. And by the way, historically, that has worked. If you look back, the Budget Control Act in 2010 came because Republicans held the line on the debt ceiling and said, we're not going to raise.
Why'd you get rid of those budget caps?
Well, because our leadership doesn't want to rein in spending. They want, they're the advocates for more and more spending. They don't want to do this. But the Budget Control Act came because we fought on the debt limit. You go back to that, Graham-Rudman, the most significant structural constraint in federal spending, came from a fight over the debt limit. What is different is Republican leadership doesn't want to fight on the debt limit because they're terrified. They're terrified of the press. And so systematically what happens is leadership's position is, let's start by surrendering. And in terms of reining in spending, I'll tell you, we do have an opportunity. Look, everyone knows we have a Republican leader election this year. Mitch McConnell is leaving. And that's going to happen the week after Election Day. My view, I've stayed quiet on this. I'm keeping my cards close to my vest deliberately, but I'm telling everyone who's running, what I'm most interested in is changing how the Senate operates. And in particular, and I'm going to bring you into something really weedy and wonky, but then I'm going to explain why it matters. What I am saying to everyone running for leader of the Republicans in the Senate is that I want the next majority leader to commit not to fill the tree. Now, what does that mean? Filling the tree is a parliamentary tool that blocks every amendment on any bill that is coming up on the floor. For 200 years of our nation's history, the way the Senate worked, every senator had two prerogatives: the prerogative of debate, that you could speak in an unlimited amount, and the prerogative of amendment. You could offer unlimited amendments. That's the way the Senate operated for 2 centuries. 3 majority leaders, Harry Reid, Mitch McConnell, and Chuck Schumer, ended that. And all 3 of them now, what they do with virtually every bill, they put a bill on the floor, they fill the tree, which means they block all amendments, and then they jam it through. And here's why it matters for spending. Steve, you wake up, you're a Republican senator tomorrow. You get a 2,000-page bill dropped on your desk that is trillions of dollars in spending, and you're given a binary decision, up, down. Either vote yes or vote no, and if you vote no, you're a wild barbarian who wants to shut the government down. It's designed to grow the government. If the majority leader commits not to fill the tree, what would happen is you would allow amendments on a budget bill. So if there's some crappy spending provision, you file an amendment to cut it out. And you go through one amendment after another, and you can pare out a lot of the garbage. And right now, the way the system works, you have 2 super senators, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, and 98 baby senators who don't get input on what we're voting. And it is the Republican senators who acquiesce in the leader having this power. So my hope is whoever the next leader is will have the guts to say we're going to change it. That's what I'm fighting.
So 2 more quick questions. Number 1. Yes, you should be the Senate Majority Leader. Amen to that. Amen.
Thank you.
You want to respond to that? Come on, we don't have a conservative in the race.
Look, I'm not saying no forever, but
We'll see.
But I'm saying no right now.
All right. So we had a huge win in the Supreme Court with the Chevron. You're a lawyer.
Yes.
And so we are hoping as a movement that this will then force Congress to vote on these things. You know, all these laws. You don't even make laws anymore in the Senate, right? I mean, you don't make laws. The laws are all made by the executive branch. Are you hopeful? Do you think we can use this Chevron decision to roll back the regulatory state?
Well, we certainly should. The Chevron decision was a big victory. It weakened unelected bureaucrats who have made rules for a long time. Look, going into this next administration, I hope both on the executive side and the congressional side, we bring a level of seriousness to actually delivering results that historically Republicans have not. I can tell you in August of 2018, we had a lunch of all the Senate Republicans, and I made a presentation to all the Senate Republicans. It was entitled Carpe Diem, Seize the Day. And it was about a 45-page PowerPoint. And what I did is I walked through historically every time in the last century the Democrats have had unified control of the executive in both houses of Congress, and every time Republicans have. And when Democrats have control, they pass the New Deal. They pass the Great Society. They pass Obamacare and Dodd-Frank.
Right.
They fundamentally rework the country.
Yes.
When Republicans have unified control, we do almost nothing. And I went through historically, we have piddling legislative victories compared to Democrats. And part of the problem is too many Republicans treat politics like we're playing croquet in the back lawn. And not like we're saving the greatest country in the history of the world. So what I proposed to leadership in August of 18, I said, listen, it is not complicated politics that the odds are significant that in November we're going to lose at least one House of Congress. If that is the case, we have, I think it was 183 days from now to the end of this Congress to get anything done. The major legislative victory of this Congress was the tax cut. We passed that using what's called budget reconciliation. Yes. Budget reconciliation cannot be filibustered. I argued we ought to do another budget reconciliation, and I had a spreadsheet of 50 different bills that different Republican senators had introduced that have a good shot at getting 50 votes. So they're not fringe things that would get a dozen votes. They all could get 45 easily, and they all arguably could get 50. And I said, listen, we can't do all of them, but let's pick 5. Here's my radical proposition to my colleagues. Let's do something. For God's sakes, let's accomplish something. And Steve, on your question, my submission for the top priority there was something called the REINS Act. Now, the REINS Act, which goes hand in hand with overturning Chevron, the REINS Act says that any economic regulation that imposes $100 million or more of cost on the economy cannot go into effect without an affirmative up-down vote from Congress. It would be the most significant federal reg reform ever adopted. And in many ways more significant than the tax cut.
I would say that should be a very, very top priority if you take the House and Senate.
It should be, and Steve, this is where we need the focus. So Mitch McConnell looked at me and said, "Oh, Ted, we can't get 51 votes for a budget." And I'm like, Mitch, I got a crazy idea. How about the same damn 51 votes who just voted for a budget to pass our tax cut?
Right. Yeah.
The single most indefensible political and policy decision of the Republican Congress when we had the majority is we did not take up a reconciliation in 2018. Yeah, Republican leadership didn't want to accomplish anything. It was infuriating. And I will say, by the way, on the REINS Act, the first Trump administration came in, and the team that came in, I think, was not fully prepared for the challenges. I hope this second administration comes in with a much greater focus on deliverables. And I'll give an example. So I went with Cory Gardner and Steve Daines. The three of us went to the White House. We met with the chief of staff. We met with every White House staffer we could. We met with the president. We proposed attaching the REINS Act to the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Now, why is that? Because the trade agreement is voted on under something called TPA, Trade Promotion Authority. TPA cannot be filibustered. TPA puts something on the floor that is an up-down vote at a 50-vote threshold with no amendments. And I said, look, all you have to do is add the REINS Act to the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. By the way, Canada and Mexico don't need to agree to it. We can add it and say, as part of this agreement, America is agreeing we're going to stop regulating the hell out of our businesses. We're going to put it on there. It goes to the Senate, and there's no filibuster on it. And the problem in the first administration was the White House was too siloed. So Lighthizer ran trade negotiations, and he's like, oh, I don't care about that. I care about cars in Mexico. I'm like, cars in Mexico are great. How about the entire economy and reg reform? It's like, no, not my problem.
Yeah.
So I would say there's a real need, both in Congress and the White House, for more focused deliverables. But let me say this. These are great debates to be having. I am excited in January and February and March of next year to be sitting down and saying, look, let's get effective, let's be bigger, let's be bolder, let's cut taxes more, let's repeal regulations more, let's end the war on energy. We're going to do that. The unilateral stuff we'll do. I do hope in this second administration we win victories that are permanent, because in the first administration a lot of things were done purely by executive order. That you can get done, but what folks discovered is if the bad guys win the next election, if you live by the pen, you die by the pen, and everything goes away the day the next president comes into office. So if we want to win lasting victories, we need strategies to actually get it enacted into law. I hope and believe we'll do that next time.
So, folks, I think that's a great note to end this conference on. Ted Cruz, you are a national hero. You should be the Senate Majority Leader. And thank you all for coming. We are the Committee to Unleash Prosperity.
Steve, real quick,
David,
I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. This takes a lot of money and resources to put on stuff like this. So I want to mention our sponsors just once again. Can we put a hand together for the International Bank Shares Corp down Laredo, Texas? Dennis Nixon, right there. Thank you so much. And then Herald Group, our good friends in Washington, D.C. They get stuff done. Jared Parks is back there. Thank you so much for being here. One last thing. There is a great event. We heard about the legend Harold Hamm here. He's going to be next door. And I also heard that former Prime Minister Liz Truss is here. And she's going to be there, too. And I'm sure they can share stories about horizontal drilling there in the UK as well. So anyway, head next door right after this. Thanks so much, everybody.
Hey,